Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and the climax of our series on the issue of violence in the communities of London. In our first show, we heard the moving testimony from Dr. Mark Prince, a man who turned the tragedy of the loss of his son to knife crime into a personal crusade against violence.
I said openly when my daughter could hear me in the back of the seat, God save my son. Don't let my son die. Don't let my son be killed. And then I quietly said, but if he dies, help me to accept it.
In last week's show, we examined the Scottish example of treating knife crime as a public health issue. Curable, not inevitable. Former Scottish Cabinet Secretary for Justice, Kenny McCaskill, warned politicians in England to prepare for a long haul.
The Mayor, and indeed the Home Secretary, can recognise that the underlying solutions need addressed, equally balance it with the public reassurance that London can get through this. But they've got to address the underlying reasons, and equally, they've also got to be able to give reassurance to young people who are frightened at the moment that they'll be protected, that a policeman will be there to make sure that the person who might use a knife will be detected.
In today's show, we visit one of the communities most affected by spiralling levels of violence, Camberwell in South London. And in a highly revealing interview, Alex speaks to 3 young men, ex-gang members, victims and perpetrators of violence, who have found their own route to salvation.
Last year, I believe we contributed very well to the reduction in crime rate in Croydon. And I believe because of people like us that go back into our communities, it's slowly beginning to show that there is an amazing effect when we begin to take responsibility for our community and hold the responsibility of seeing our community change.
But first, your tweets, messages and emails in response to our show last week. Carolyn says, Alex, your programme with Kenny McCaskill was so insightful. Love your programme every week. Thanks, Carolyn. Please do keep watching. Mary says, how will any policy on knife crime work in England when, to all intents and purposes, the Tories are cutting the police force there to the bone? Donald says, great leadership shown from Kenny McCaskill on how to make a positive change to save lives, working with many others. And finally, John also picks up on the issue of police numbers in England, saying Tories don't do that, i.e. they're not increasing police numbers because they think they know better than everyone else. They're not the ones that are on the front line. Now, one constant refrain of those battling against youngsters being swallowed up in the cycle of violence has been the closure of community facilities and lack of life opportunities. But is there one more lesson from Scotland that could be of assistance? Alex takes up the story.
There is one further initiative from Scotland that could have a bearing on London. Local authority cutbacks have left community facilities in tatters. Now, there is pressure on local authority finance north and south of the border. However, in Scotland over the last 10 years, over £90 million have been invested in community facilities by taking money from organised crime and providing cash back for communities. In England, the proceeds of crime go half to the Home Office and half to the court's discretion. In Scotland, community cashback alone has received over £60 million over 10 years and generated over 2 million activities for young people. I'm pleased to welcome former Cabinet Secretary in Scotland for Communities and Social Justice to explain the thinking behind the Scottish programme. Alec Neil, welcome back to the Alex Salmond Show.
Pleasure.
Proceeds of crime legislation is not unique to Scotland, but this initiative of cashback for communities is. What's your evaluation of that programme over these last 10 years?
It's been an absolutely brilliant programme, and even though we say £90 million has come from the programme itself has leveraged additional funding. But what's more important is the impact it's had on individuals, particularly young people, and in deprived communities. And just one example is the 4 employability programmes that have been run have ended up with up to 97% of young people finding a destination in education, training and employment.
So you're saying that cashback for communities is more than just building community facilities like 4G pitches for football. It's about more than that.
It's actually about the people involved, particularly the young people. If you look at some of the activities, they haven't actually always involved new facilities as such, but sometimes making better use of existing facilities. A very good example is in my own area. where we introduced midnight football. Now, the facilities they're there for the football, but they'd never played at midnight before. And by playing at midnight, it gave young people, young men in particular, a motive for staying off the street. And it actually reduced antisocial behaviour almost immediately by 30%.
£90 million is a powerful sum of money, and these sound like splendid initiatives. But even that sum surely hasn't compensated in full for the cutbacks in facilities at local levels due to the pressures on public finance over the last decade.
No, it hasn't, but nevertheless, the pressures would have been far greater, and we would not have seen the dramatic drop in crime rates, for example, without cashback for communities. So cashback has had added value in a way that no other programme has had.
Tell me the importance of finding the right mentors to explain to young people the futility of violence and that there is other opportunities in life.
It's critically important, and it's critically important at a very young age. In my constituency, I have Shotts Prison, and Shotts Prison houses many of the long-time lifers who are serving for murder and other serious crimes, and they actually host young people coming in, and it's done through cashback and other programmes as well. And they then tell the young people where they went wrong. And they also very often come from very similar poor, deprived backgrounds and explain to young people that that's no excuse. It's not a good reason for getting involved in crime. There are different ways to handle being poor or being deprived. And being in crime is not the right way to do it.
Would you have a message from the cashback programme in Scotland to your colleagues in London and elsewhere in England?
Absolutely, and that is to do what we're doing. Use all the money to reinvest in these communities. You'll get a far bigger return. If it just goes into a big black hole in the Treasury, nobody knows how that money is being spent. So I would have no hesitation, and even to the Treasury, of saying if you want better value for money, use this money the way we've used it. You'll get a far better return, you'll save money in the long run, and you'll end up with better outcomes for our young people in our society.
Alec Neil, obviously there's been a major success of the programme in changing individual lives. Is there any one thing you can point to as showing what Cashback for Communities has done to transform Scotland's prospects?
Well, actually, a lot of the young people, a very good example is the money put into football for women. When Cashback started, women's football was very, very much in its infancy and was struggling to get cash anywhere. Now we've been so successful, we're actually being lined up for involvement in the World Cup for women's football. So that's a very good example of how you can transform at a national level the performance of the country, in this case in sport, but that also contributes to wider society as well as helping these individuals involved in women's football.
And Alec Neil, will you be in France cheering on Scotland's women?
I would be delighted to do so.
Alec Neil, former Cabinet Secretary for Communities and Equality, thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure.
So how do you get the message across against violence in communities, against gang culture in particular? Well, one way is through the medium of film. Take a look at this clip from a film called If Only.
Oh, brothers, let's go down, down in the river to pray.
Witnesses tried to resuscitate his body, but their attempts were unsuccessful.
You've got to leave all this gang stuff alone, man.
So I'm now delighted to be joined by Freddie Nwaka, the director, producer, writer of If Only. What inspired you to make that film?
I think being involved in so many issues surrounding gang crime and knife crime in my earlier days, I thought the best way to get through to some of these young people is to hit them with something that's kind of compelling, hard, gritty, but most importantly, that's real and things that they can identify with. So I thought, let me hit them hard.
I mean, If Only has that touch of authenticity, the thing you can't fake. I mean, you must have lost some of your own friends to gang violence.
Yeah, to date I've lost well over 45 friends from knife crime, gun crime, had people die in my arms, I've saved lives. So yeah, I put those things into the movie.
So your film was very celebrated, if only had a BAFTA showing, I know. And yet it was a film that you basically scraped together for your own means and getting all your pals to take part. I'm interested in the impact it's had when it's been shown around schools. I mean, if you had local kids come up to you and say, Friday, thank goodness I saw your film, it changed my life. Have you had that sort of experience?
Yeah, definitely. I've had mums come up with their children, inboxing me, texting me, calling me, saying they watched the film, how true to life it is. I've had young kids come up to me saying, you know what, after watching your film, I kind of stopped carrying knives and guns. The response has been amazing.
And yet we've seen this spiralling level of violence, not all gang-related, it should be said, but knife violence over the last few years, particularly in London, but around other metropolitan areas of England. How do you get the message across to young people? What is the most important thing, do you believe?
I think the best way to get the message across is to send real people to give real messages. A lot of these young people don't want to hear it from politicians or people in suits and ties or people that went to university and studied, I guess, psychology or sociology. They want to hear it from people that live that life. Real people that have been through the same things that they've been through, the same challenges, and people that they can identify with.
Now, you've heard about the Cashback for Communities initiative in Scotland, where the proceeds of crime is then devoted to community activities, employability, initiatives in communities like plays or films, for example. What role do you think that could have in England?
I think that's amazing. I think that would be such a great impact. The fact that the proceeds that are coming from ill gain are now going back in to help change the community, not only giving young people jobs, but also giving them incentives. I've always said, if you want young people to stop doing certain things, you need to give them something else to replace the things that they were doing previously.
When you're speaking about your film or about If Only or generally, I mean, how do you get across? I mean, the youngsters look at you first and say, well, what do you know, old guy? And how do you get that touch across to them?
You know, it's funny. A lot of them come up to me when I go into schools and prisons and stuff, and the first thing they say, but you don't know what it's like, sir, you don't know what it's about. And when I break down my story, they're shocked. What happens is the authenticity comes through, and then they realise if I can change, then they can change also. So that's kind of the way forward.
Now, finally, Freddie, if I could spirit the Mayor of London and the Home Secretary into the studio right now, and you had them in front of you, what would be the big message that you gave them?
I'd be like, straight away, we need to jump on this Cashback for Communities thing. I think it's an amazing idea and policy to bring in, to do. It gives young people something to do, and it replaces the negative impacts and the things that they're thinking about with something positive. So I'd be like, yeah, let's get this money in and let's give these young people an alternative to the life they're living.
Freddie, I can't wave my hand and get them to introduce Cashback for Communities, but what I can do for appearing in the show is present you with the Alex Salmond Quake. You know the drill. Whiskey, only Scotch, that's in the Quake, and then passed round all your close friends.
Thank you, thank you.
Coming up after the break, we report from a London estate which has seen 4 knife crime murders in 3 months. And Alex speaks to 3 former gang members about what they think can be done to stop the killings. We'll see you then. Welcome back. Now we join Alex in Camberwell, speaking to 3 young pastors from the religious denomination SPAC Nation. Pastor Enrique, Pastor Samuel and Pastor Kevin were not just gang members, but gang leaders. Now they're hoping to lead their communities in a totally different direction.
Enrique, Sam, Kevin, welcome to the Alex Salmond Show.
Thank you very much.
Enrique, can I ask you first, I mean, you all 3 of you grew up in communities like this in London. How do so many youngsters get drawn into a cycle of violence and crime in places such as this?
Well, many people are drawn into violence, especially in this area of Southwark, because of the lack of opportunities that they have to be able to express themselves as young people.
And Sam, I mean, is it a lack of facilities, or does it become a culture of violence?
To be honest, it's definitely not a lack of facilities. We grew up around facilities, but a culture is developed when a community doesn't have any hope, or especially the youngsters in the community do not see hope, but what they see around them is hardship.
And Kevin, I mean, you've all been involved pretty fiercely in gang culture. Is the violence gang-related, or is it more complex than that?
To be honest with you, I think it's both. Do you understand? I think it is gang-related because it's somewhere that it's coming from somewhere where everybody's familiar with each other, everybody's friends, and I think it goes beyond gang culture as well.
Now, all three of you, and you're still young men, you've turned away from that lifestyle. You're all now pastors in the SPAC Nation Church.
Yeah.
I mean, how did you find that personal salvation? You first, Enrique.
So I was stabbed at the age of 17. I was arrested for attempted murder at the age of 15. If you haven't gone through something and overcome what you've gone through, how do you then relate with the people that are currently in that situation? But going through all those things, and now me being a pastor, leading hundreds of young people, even outside of London, is what I'm now confident and bold enough to tell other young people, you can also come out of this lifestyle and follow me.
Now, Sam, I mean, it seems quite a transition, you know, from a gang leader to a preacher, a pastor in the SPAC Nation Church. Has there been bumps along the way, or does it all come naturally to you?
To be honest with you, I think gang leader or pastor, there's still one trait in common with both the gang leader and the pastor, which is leader. They're a leader. So for me, when I was 17, I'd been on the road or the street for a long time, and I ended up in prison. I came out of prison at the age of 20, so I'd spent almost 3 years in prison, and I then began to think to myself, okay, I want to go back into the life of gang violence, but I met Pastor Toby, which is the leader of SPAC Nation, and he then helped me to see things in a different way. So there was something in common between me, the gang leader, and me, the pastor, but what was able to change that was the person that I was introduced to, which was Pastor Toby. So that changed my view and my perspective on life, and then I became a pastor, and now I'm a preacher as well.
And Kevin, did you have a similar encounter with an inspirational figure, or was it another way that you found a different path?
I found the path a different way, actually. I actually came to the church to beat someone up. But having come to the church and then seeing what was happening around me, I decided that I wanted to be involved.
Now, as you know, guys, we've been looking at some of the initiatives we tried in Scotland over the last 10 years, which have been remarkably successful. Not working instantaneously, incidentally, but one of these has been to bring former gang leaders into communities to tell people about their experience. Now, most of that in Scotland has been saying that youngsters, look, don't follow my path. But you've got something else, isn't it? You've got another alternative path to point to. How powerful is that, Sam?
My former stomping ground was Croydon. For the last 5 years, I've been in Croydon preaching the message of change, especially, and we've seen immense results in there, to the point that last year, I believe we contributed very well to the reduction in crime rate in Croydon. We had not only lives are very precious, but there were 2 stabbings in Croydon last year. And I believe because of people like us that go back into our communities, it's slowly beginning to show that there is an amazing effect when we begin to take responsibility for our community and hold the responsibility of seeing our community change.
Kevin, the local hospital in this community is just a few minutes down the road, King's College. Last year they had 500 youngsters in accident and emergency, either victims of stabbing or assault. That's a huge amount of suffering. Is it possible that initiatives like yours can really make a dent in these enormous numbers?
It's definitely possible that we can make. I think we can make more than a dent, but it all comes down to how many of us are out there. That's what we try to do. We try to look for people that are like us, change them around, so then they can make a bigger impact than we can.
Sam, I was once the First Minister of Scotland. Now let's just imagine I'd been First Minister of England and I'd said, Sam, I'm appointing you as Home Secretary. What would be your first action as Home Secretary to tackle this scourge of knife crime and community violence?
I would, first of all, locate those who I would call community influencers, those who have their ears to the ground, their ears on the street, and to speak the language of those who are currently in the crisis. I would locate those people, and then I would also have a sit down with them and create a strategy as to how we can then infiltrate or model and try and get it all over London widespread.
And Sam, how disillusioned are communities like this with the orthodox political structures? I mean, the politicians, whether it be the mayor's office or Westminster or Downing Street, Are they really in touch, or do they have any real knowledge of what's actually going on in places such as this?
My personal thought is that they may not need to have first-hand knowledge of what's going on in the communities, but they must have first-hand knowledge on who knows what's going on in the community. We're not asking government to be street patrol. We're just asking government to have the right conversations with the right people. Because as long as they can do that, then there can be change within our societies. And for me, community salvation comes from personal salvation. One of our major things that we're very big on in SPAT Nation is mentorship. The only way that mentorship can be widespread is if government endorse and empower those who are currently on the ground doing it. Maybe they may not have a great sense about what's going on the ground in these communities, but there are people who do. And I think as long as they empower and endorse those who do, then the work that we're trying to achieve, maybe not overnight, but will get done a lot quicker and we'll save a lot of lives a lot quicker as well.
Enrique, relationship with the police and law enforcement in many areas is a difficult one, particularly establishing trust. What would your message be to law enforcement, to the officialdom, to the police, as to how they can have a reach into communities such as this, which perhaps they don't have this now?
It's not easy to be a police officer. It's not easy to change a community if, like Pastor Sam said, if you don't have access to the people that know what's going on within the communities. So what I would say, what will make the job of the police officers more effective, or what will be able to empower them to change our community, our society, is them being able to work with the leaders or the people that have influence in the communities. One of the things that I've observed over the years is that police officers don't tend to have direct access or direct conversations with the people that have influence over the communities. What they tend to do is that they either assume or they automatically have this order amongst themselves that they just want to arrest or detain anybody they see. What they need to actually do before detaining anyone is, let's get access to the person that has influence over this community. Let's work with him. And through that, we'll be able to change our community.
You spoke about your time in jail. Positive or a negative for you?
It's a positive if I want to continue doing negative. That's what
Now, Sam, you're going to have to explain that one to me.
Yeah, so
it's a positive if you want to continue doing negative.
So before I went into jail, I was confined to the area of Croydon. But by the time I went into jail, I've met people from West London, East London, and we're all in jail for a crime similar. So my network has already immediately grown. By the time I came out of jail, I was confident that I can start moving drugs in big amounts.
So it was like a college of crime.
College of crime. I love that. It was like a college of crime. And I was very motivated to come out and continue my education in crime when I get out. But it was only the intervention of a person that actually changed that for me. So if you ask me, it's definitely a negative. I think you can detain somebody for a while, but when you're in somewhere like prison, you're actually reduced in hope. It's not like it teaches you about how your life can be different. It only teaches you that when you come out, you need to be a lot smarter and a lot more sly than you were when you went in. So definitely a negative for me.
Looking at the effects in communities, Kevin, I mean, what the cycle of violence which must affect communities such as this, get your personal experience. I mean, a single stabbing affects so many people. Well, what does it do to communities such as this in South London?
When I got accused of stabbing people, it didn't just affect the person that got stabbed, it did affect the other person that was doing the stabbing also, which means
And your mother?
My mother, my father, my brothers and sisters, those that was coming under me, and those who were even older than me. It affects everybody.
Now, guys, you're all in the business of being pastors. If your prayer could be answered in terms of dealing with community violence, what would your prayer be?
My prayer would be for those that are in power to give power where power actually lies.
Great answer. Sam, what would your one be?
I would say, this is my prayer, that by the end of, or by the time that my own, let's say, children or generation after me have grown up, that we would have dealt with this issue.
And Enrique, what do you think?
The right resources will be allocated to the right people. So it's similar to what Pastor Kevin said. The people in power, the government, those in authority, being able to trust people like ourselves, Spat Nation, with the right resources to tackle this issue.
Well, Ricky, Sam, Kevin, congratulations on turning your life around and what you do.
Thank you.
And I hope your prayers are answered.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us. Cheers.
Cheers.
This series on knife crime in London is one of the most important we've examined on the Alex Salmond Show. There is no more calamitous event for a family or a community than having young lives sacrificed to knife crime. 10 years ago, Scotland faced down this issue and came forward with some innovative solutions which are still bearing success to this day. Westminster politicians from the Mayor's office to the Home Office are taking this to heart as they respond to the crisis, not just in the capital, but in the urban areas across England. Nor can Scotland be complacent, as the hard-won gains which have seen violence levels cut down by over 75% start to edge up again. Politicians from the south look at the Scottish experiment and sometimes see what they want to see. Some see the public health approach, but fail to realise that it was accompanied by extensive use of stop and search. Some dwell on the policing effort without recognising it was only part of a holistic approach which saw knife crime as akin to an infection, curable, not inevitable. In truth, the violence reduction tactics, the anti-gang initiatives, the employability programmes, the cashback for communities all worked against the background of a strong law enforcement effort, which aimed to be respectful of communities. As Mark Prince and today Freddie and Waka told us, it's not whether you stop and search, but how you deploy stop and search. Can this approach be replicated in London? Possibly so, but three things are essential. Firstly, Kenny McCaskill rightly warned English lawmakers against expecting instant success. Scottish knife crime levels peaked in 2010 before entering the rapid period of decline. Politicians will need guts to resist the siren voices calling for the abandonment of the new approach. Secondly, community policing requires boots on the ground. You cannot follow community-style policing without police in communities. In this, the Prime Minister is wrong and the Home Secretary correct. And thirdly and finally, something more is required beyond police numbers or even additional facilities from such splendid programmes as community cashback. The three young men who Alex interviewed say people and communities need access to the rarest commodity of all. They need hope. And so from Alex, me and all of the team here at the show, it's goodbye for now and we'll see you next week.